The suitcase was wedged so deliberately across the hallway it might as well have been a barricade. Claire's pink roller bag had its own sense of entitlement, wheels locked in place, straps artfully askew, like it had been auditioning for the lead role in a suburban siege. I stood in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, watching Thomas set his jaw into that expression he reserves for clients who don't pay on time, or for me when I question the taste of his tie selection. "Take the guest room, or move out," he said, as casually as if he were announcing the menu for brunch. Claire rested her hands lightly on her belly, smirk carefully calibrated. "Hope you're gone by the weekend," she added, like it was a polite suggestion and not a strategic dagger aimed at my center of gravity. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Evelyn, perched in the dining nook, finger tracing the rim of her teacup, let out a little cough. I know the cough. It is always the herald of judgment, the subtle punctuation of, "You are failing at being what I deem proper." I could feel it even over the hum of the refrigerator and the faint whir of the dishwasher. I took a sip of coffee. Lukewarm, acceptable. Thomas leaned against the island, smirking, arms crossed, waiting for some sign of panic. There would be none. My jaw locked a little, not in shock, but in appreciation of the theater unfolding before me. The stage was set. Every prop, every smirk, every passive-aggressive note from Evelyn, all part of their little production. And me? The unintended audience. The house gleamed like a catalog spread. Pale gray walls, quartz countertops, a kitchen so perfectly arranged it could be photographed for resale without moving a single spoon. I had orchestrated it all with surgical precision. Each throw pillow, every vase of flowers, the gleaming floors, evidence that I know the difference between a house and a showcase. And yet, despite my careful staging, they came in as though it were theirs by divine right. Claire leaned slightly against the hallway wall, shoes dangling off her feet, her toes brushing the marble I had spent hours selecting and polishing. A small detail, but in the quiet, it screamed. Thomas's voice, tight but composed, sliced through the air. "If you can't be supportive, maybe you should go stay somewhere else." The "we" in his tone always meant I. He uses collective pronouns when he's cornered. It's easier to dilute accountability. I tilted my head and let the silence stretch. Claire's smirk deepened, a tiny crease at the corner of her mouth. The one that says, "I have the upper hand, even though the upper hand is a mirage in this landscape." Evelyn let another small laugh escape. Thin, not genuine. I could see her mental checklist. 1. Vanessa cold. 2. Vanessa career-focused. 3. Vanessa easily discomfited. Incorrect assumptions, all of them. I set the coffee mug on the counter. It made a soft clink. The sound was final. I would not engage, not with words, not with anger. I had already made my calculations. There were 3 things I observed without comment, without letting them see the gears turning behind my eyes. First, I had noted the subtle trail of Jennifer Hart. Italian takeout bags with her name scribbled, mileage inconsistencies, phone habits that suggested covert communication. Not dramatic revelations, just patterns. Ordinary human signals. The affair didn't need to be discovered with spy-level tactics. Ordinary life leaves clues if one has eyes. I did. Second, I understood perfectly what Thomas had been attempting. Emotional relocation. He had begun rehearsing a future with someone else, carefully, politely, and most dangerously, with confidence that I would remain oblivious. He underestimated observation, patience, and procedural memory. My specialty. Third, and this would be the foundation of the next week's chaos, the house was mine. Solely, legally, and absolutely. A quiet document, a parcel number, a closing date. He never added his name to the deed. He assumed. That was the leverage. And it was pristine. I packed slowly. Not hurriedly. Not emotionally. Essentials, personal files, the safe deposit keys, a few clothing items. I didn't slam drawers. I didn't raise my voice. I left the door ajar. A subtle statement. Return, and the next step is mine to orchestrate. They thought victory belonged to them. It did not. Claire raised an eyebrow as if to question my composure. I let a faint smile touch my lips, though nothing soft entered my eyes. "I'll make it easy," I said, voice neutral. "I'm not going to make a scene." She blinked, not sure if she should have expected bitterness or tears. Evelyn tapped her teacup, the gesture as judgmental as any declaration from a courtroom bench. I ignored her. Thomas straightened, adjusting his tie. I considered giving him a look that said, "You're holding the wrong cards. but opted to keep it for later. Timing is a weapon. I walked past Claire's suitcase, around the island, toward the front door. Each step was deliberate, the echo on the hardwood loud in my ears. The driveway was visible through the glass panel. A neighbor's child waved at me from across the cul-de-sac, blissfully unaware of the domestic war raging in my kitchen. I returned a polite nod, a normal gesture, perfectly suburban. I was aware, always, that appearances mattered. At the door, I paused. My hand rested on the handle. The moment stretched. The ultimate humiliation they thought they had achieved. They'd forgotten I could respond quietly, lethally, with patience. The door creaked slightly as I nudged it open. "I'll take care of things from here," I murmured to no one. Thomas's lips parted as if he might speak, but I had already calculated his options. He had none that didn't require confrontation on my terms. Claire's smirk faltered just enough to see confusion creep in. Evelyn's teacup wavered slightly, unnoticed by her, noticed by me. Once outside, I slid into the driver's seat. Car keys in hand, not a single glance back. Engine started, mirrors adjusted. The hum of the vehicle was grounding. I exhaled. Not relief, not triumph. Observation, calculation, patience. As I pulled out of the driveway, I allowed a thought to cross my mind, meta, almost wry. You just handed me reason and motive in writing. The first layer of the plan was complete, a verbal trap set and documented in my own memory. They assumed conflict had begun. They assumed they had initiated it, but all I had done was walk quietly, deliberately, letting the pieces fall into my hands. Traffic moved slowly, as it does in cul-de-sacs designed to encourage polite driving and the occasional gossiping glance from a neighbor. I noticed the way the sun caught the curve of a newly painted mailbox across the street, how the hydrangeas in bloom seemed too perfect, curated by someone with more time than sense. Observations stacked like blocks, patterns forming, leverage waiting. I pulled over briefly at the corner, foot on the brake, and opened the folder in the passenger seat. Deed, refinance records, proof of sole ownership. Each document was crisp, factual, indisputable. Thomas had never seen them, never considered them. A single fold of paper, and the house, his presumed kingdom, would be no more his than the air he was exhaling in my kitchen that morning. A small smile, tight, contained. I didn't slam a door, I murmured to myself, almost theatrically. I left the door ajar. You leave doors ajar when you're coming back with paperwork. That would be the first announcement. Quiet. Legal. I could almost hear the gears turning in Thomas's mind, even from here. He hadn't noticed yet. Patience was key. The reveal had to be timed. I drove through the main street, neighborhood meticulously maintained, neighbors waving, masks of civility everywhere. Behind them, as always, a tangle of alliances, gossip, small betrayals. Perfect conditions. Everything a suburban stage needs for a careful, precise disruption. A flash of the Italian takeout receipt I discovered a month earlier crossed my mind. Small breadcrumbs. Jennifer's name scrawled across the top. The late hours at the office, Thomas claimed, were crunch time. I had not reacted then. Not yet. Evidence accumulates, like water dripping in a basin. Small, constant, inescapable. I glanced in the rearview mirror, noted a neighbor's SUV pulling out behind me. Timing perfect, distractions minimal. Tomorrow, paperwork. Action within the system, methodical, precise, ruthless. No dramatics, no shouts, no panic, just leverage exercised cleanly. The house disappeared from view behind the bend, but the memory of that morning, Claire's smirk, Evelyn's cough, Thomas's smugness, remained vivid. I let them sit there for a moment. Weighty, immovable. A reminder that control is often quiet, not performative. My phone buzzed. A text from Melanie, innocuous. I ignored it. Timing, priorities, layers of action. Each contact, each whisper, each minor insult recorded in my mind, cataloged for use. Everything a chessboard. Every human a pawn in their own strategy. Pulling into a side street, I allowed a brief pause. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. Not for peace, not for reflection, just to center the next phase. The folder on the passenger seat caught the light. Crisp edges, the legal right, the first domino. I started the car again, the engine purring, taking me toward the next step. The air smelled faintly of late autumn leaves and freshly cut grass. Ordinary suburban scents, grounding in their normalcy. And yet, all around me, opportunity waited. Every look, every habitual gesture of entitlement, every miscalculation from Thomas and his entourage would be leveraged. I could already see it in my mind. The quiet satisfaction when notices were served, the ripple effect through the neighborhood, the first pangs of panic as they realized I was not bluffing. Every small observation that morning, catalogued and filed mentally, now forming the skeleton of what would become a methodical demolition. I smiled faintly, not for joy, but for recognition. Control regained quietly, elegantly, the first act complete. The house, my rules, my timing, they had underestimated me, as always, and that, I decided, was the perfect beginning. By the time I reached the intersection leading back to my apartment for the night, I allowed myself one more meta-thought, brief and precise. If this were a book, we'd be barely past the first chapter, characters introduced, stakes set, and already, quietly, I held all the leverage. And I hadn't even begun to swing. It had started with small, almost imperceptible shifts. Thomas's late nights at the office, the subtle hesitation in his tone when he answered my questions about meetings, the way his phone flipped face down whenever I entered the room. At first, I chalked it up to work stress. An accountant's life is built on numbers, timelines, and slightly over-caffeinated anxiety. But numbers lie less than people do, and patterns never lie at all. One Thursday, a month ago, I noticed the SUV's odometer didn't match the trips he claimed he had taken. We shared the car, and I kept track, not obsessively, but professionally, the way one monitors client ledgers. There was a discrepancy of nearly 80 miles. I did not confront him. Not then. I filed it mentally and moved on. Patterns need context before they become proof. Then the Italian takeout receipt appeared. Nothing extraordinary on the surface. A local trattoria I'd never chosen for dinner, tucked into his jacket pocket. The name J. Hart scribbled faintly across the corner of the sticker caught my eye. A casual notation, an afterthought for most, but a neon sign to someone trained in observation and record-keeping. He could have explained it away, but no explanation came. The pattern was emerging, and I was cataloging every detail, quietly, precisely. Saturday brunch with the HOA circle made the social dynamic clear. Melanie Andrews, once my close friend, now a wary ex-ally, sat across the table in her usual sun hat, pretending casual interest while her eyes darted to me. Two other women discussed the upcoming fall festival, the best autumn-themed decor for porches, and who had the most obedient landscaper. Somewhere between the third mimosa and the croissant plate, Melanie mentioned Jennifer Hart in passing, too casual, too familiar. I let the comment wash over me, carefully neutral, but mentally noted the tone. She wasn't talking about anyone in the abstract. She was signaling knowledge, almost slyly, as if to test whether I was paying attention. By now, I had all the pieces I needed. Observations, receipts, mileage, social slips, all of it pointed to a single conclusion. But I am nothing if not methodical. Patterns require a patient hand. Evidence is the difference between accusation and undeniable proof. I bided my time, keeping my focus razor sharp. That evening, I sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open, coffee cooling beside me. I reviewed the property records again. The house was mine, solely mine. The deed, mortgage, refinance, all signed in my name alone. The legal weight of it settled around me like a quiet shield. He had assumed, as many do, that shared life equals shared ownership. He had never asked, never verified. His arrogance had created the first layer of leverage in what would become a surgical dismantling of his carefully constructed facade. Next came planning the first direct confrontation, the one that would establish boundaries and assert presence. I would not act recklessly. This was not about dramatics. It was about messaging, clarity, and control. Jennifer Hart had to understand, in no uncertain terms, that she had been miscalculating the situation from the start. It was Tuesday when I cornered her in the parking lot of her branch office. Night had fallen, and the lot was mostly empty, save for a few cars belonging to those who arrived late for their own errands. Her white crossover gleamed under the harsh glow of the overhead lights, freshly washed, as if she believed appearances could shield her from consequences. She stepped toward it, phone in hand, smiling as if the night were neutral territory. It was not. I leaned against the passenger side, key in hand, casual but precise. "Hi, I'm Vanessa," I said, voice calm, neutral, carrying no heat but every ounce of authority I possessed. "I'm the current Mrs. Cole. I'm the one paying the garage where he's been keeping his spare suit." She froze for a fraction of a second. That pause was all I needed. I produced the Italian takeout receipt, along with the mileage discrepancies, neatly folded in my palm. Nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just facts. Her smile wavered. "You're mistaken," she said, still attempting to control the scene, but the faint tremor betrayed the doubt she hadn't intended to display. I pressed the key lightly against her car door, dragging a single, deliberate line across the paint. The scratch was visible but subtle, a warning, not a spectacle. My eyes never left hers. "If you keep thinking I'm quiet, your car is going to start matching your attitude," I said, soft, precise, and steady. She tried to shove me, small but insistent, testing whether I would flinch. I shoved back with measured pressure, nothing injurious, just enough to establish boundaries. "Step away from my house. You are not moving in." Her confidence cracked in that instant. The smug assumption she had been nurturing for weeks began to crumble. Her hands froze mid-motion, eyes darting to mine for reassurance, clarity, some invisible permission. There was none, not ever. I allowed the silence to stretch, let her imagination do the work. She would replay this moment in her mind for days. By the time I drove away, the night air was cold, crisp, and ordinary. I merged back onto the main road, thinking through the next steps. The eviction notices would follow. Thomas, Claire, Evelyn, all would receive formal documentation that occupancy was unauthorized. Paperwork delivered through the proper channels, indisputable and precise. Jennifer had already received the first layer of warning, methodical, quiet, legal. I returned home briefly, pulled more documents, files, calendars, every detail that might reinforce the next phase of leverage. It was a meticulous collection of small truths, ordinary evidence amplified by context. The pattern I had been watching for weeks was now ready to snap into action. The neighborhood had its predictable rhythm: weekend landscapers, jogging parents with strollers, homeowners arranging their front porches for optimal curb appeal. I observed it all without comment. Everything visible was ordinary. The tension lay beneath, subtle, a quiet war waiting for the signal. Monday arrived with golden light spilling across the countertops. I reviewed Thomas's calendar again. Off-book meetings with Jennifer, client handoffs, promises made that were not documented in any formal agreement. Legal and ethical lines were blurred, and that blur was enough to set the next layer of consequences in motion. A simple, anonymous email to his supervisor would trigger an immediate internal review. That review would fracture his professional standing, and the neighbors, ever vigilant for gossip, would see it unfold as if watching a live performance. The day progressed with a deceptive calm. I took a long walk through the cul-de-sac, nodding at neighbors who waved politely, masks of normalcy firmly in place. I catalogued everything, even the smallest signs of surveillance or attention, which neighbors peeked from blinds, who lingered near the mailbox longer than necessary. Every ordinary glance was a potential ripple for the unfolding plan. By late afternoon, I was back in the car, driving to the bank branch again. Jennifer arrived, white crossover glinting under the fading sun, confidence renewed as if our previous encounter had never occurred. This time, I approached differently. No physical contact, just presence, controlled and immovable. "I see you've parked again," I said, voice neutral, calm, and precise. "I need you to understand, this house is not for you. You are not moving in, and you never will. Thomas and I have a legal history you were never privy to, facts you assumed you could ignore." She laughed softly, a brittle sound. "I'm just trying to help him," she said, though the tremor betrayed her uncertainty. I leaned closer to the vehicle, hand resting lightly on the hood, not threatening, just confirming boundaries. "Helping him?" I asked. "You mean assisting him in building a life at my expense? That's not help. That's assumption, and assumptions have consequences." Her eyes flicked down at the scratch, then back up. She nodded faintly, a gesture of reluctant acknowledgement. I stepped back, giving her space, letting the quiet weight of my observation and methodical precision settle over her. She understood now that her confidence had been misplaced. It was not arrogance I disdained, arrogance I respected. This was entitlement, naivety, and poor calculation, all wrapped in freshly washed paint. By the time I returned home, night had fallen. My living room was quiet, staged, and pristine as ever. The house? Mine, a fortress of careful observation and legal clarity. I poured myself a cup of tea, letting the warmth ground me in ordinary human sensations. Nothing dramatic, no theatrics. Just calculation, control, and clarity. I reviewed the next steps, mentally filing each piece of leverage into a hierarchy. Eviction notices, evidence forwarded to the employer, documentation of unauthorized occupancy, and the neighborhood's inevitable fascination. All were sequenced with precision. Action would follow consequence. Consequence would follow observation. Every move deliberate. I allowed a small, dry smile to brush my lips. The narrative was unfolding exactly as anticipated. Melanie's slip at brunch, Thomas's casual overconfidence, Jennifer's assumption of entitlement, all pieces of a puzzle forming a complete picture. They believed the game was theirs. They would learn gradually that the board had been set according to my rules all along. Sitting at the kitchen counter, I opened my folder again. Receipts, mileage, notes from brunch, calendar screenshots, ordinary details that carried extraordinary weight when applied strategically. The evidence was mundane, indisputable, human. It needed no embellishment, no exaggeration. It was reality, arranged in a sequence that could not be ignored. I checked the time. Tomorrow, the courier would deliver the first set of notices. Thomas would scramble, Claire would protest, Evelyn would sputter, Jennifer would rethink her plans, and I would watch, calmly, as the first layer of controlled retribution unfolded. No dramatics required. The quiet assertion of rightful ownership, methodical and precise, would speak for itself. I stood, stretching, letting my hands trace the smooth edges of the countertops, observing the way light fell across the room. Every detail mattered. Angles, reflections, the faint echo of my own movements. This house, this space, was mine. Every decision, every observation, every subtle gesture. They were the currency of power. And I was fully invested, fully prepared, and fully in control. The night settled outside, ordinary and quiet, but inside a pattern had formed. Evidence collected, leverage cataloged, confidence measured. The first confrontation had been subtle, precise, and effective. The next steps, procedural and unassailable, would follow. This was not vengeance. It was execution of observation, documentation, and human logic. And tomorrow, the quiet work of empowerment would continue. I poured the last of the tea into my cup, holding it for a moment. A reminder: warmth, control, patience, and precision. Those are the things that win when the board is set correctly. Everything else is incidental. The first moves had been made. The pieces were in motion. And the night, as ordinary as it seemed, was already alive with consequence. By the time I closed the folder, stacked the documents neatly, and turned off the lights, I felt no elation, no anxiety, only clarity. Tomorrow, the chain would continue. Every observation, every small detail, every human miscalculation would be leveraged. The night was ordinary, the house pristine, and I was ready. Tomorrow, the dominoes would fall. The courier arrived at precisely 9:30. Smartly dressed, professional, unremarkable. The kind of person who blends into the neighborhood background. Invisible, yet necessary. Claire answered the door first, expecting a routine delivery. I could see the confusion ripple across her face the moment she read the first line. Unauthorized occupancy, legal ownership, immediate vacation of the premises. Her mouth opened, shut, then opened again, searching for a verbal escape hatch. None existed. "You can't do this," she finally squeaked, as if volume alone could reverse the facts. "I'm carrying family. You can't—" "You're carrying attitude, not a lease," I interjected, voice calm, measured, slicing through the flutter of entitlement. My tone carried the weight of documentation, of notarized signatures, of legal reality. She flinched at the precision, but there was no recourse. The papers had arrived exactly as designed, officially served, indisputable. Evelyn emerged from the dining nook as if she had been watching for confirmation. She clutched the railing of the staircase like a shield. "Vanessa, surely this is a misunderstanding. You're not alone in this house. You've been married. This is our family's home." Her voice was perfumed with authority, yet fragile under scrutiny. I folded my arms, steady, and offered no counter-argument. Facts do not bend for drama. "The parcel number and deed are clear. Sole owner, Vanessa M. Cole. Your occupancy is unauthorized. Thomas, Claire, Evelyn, all of you, are required to vacate." Thomas appeared in the doorway just as Claire began to gather scattered papers from the courier. His face was a study in disbelief, a careful mixture of rage and incredulity. "Please tell me she's lying," he said, voice quivering despite his best attempt at control. "She can't really own the house." I did not respond. Words were unnecessary. The legal documents spoke in plain language, leaving him only the uncomfortable choice between acceptance or public scrambling. He fumbled for his phone, calling Evelyn on speaker, his voice higher than intended. "Mom, tell me she's wrong, please." Evelyn sputtered, taken aback by his panic. "Well, it says, the parcel, the closing, She stumbled over her own contradictions, grasping at familial loyalty like a life preserver. I watched her carefully, noting the way her posture tightened, the subtle twitch of her fingers. She was realizing, as Thomas should have, that the foundation of their assumptions had no purchase in reality. Claire's wails escalated. "You can't do this to a pregnant woman," she cried, half shrieking, half pleading. I stood quietly, letting the words hang in the air like a poorly aimed threat. "You told me to be gone by the weekend," I said softly, deliberately precise. I agreed, and now I'm enforcing what you initiated. That's all. The neighborhood was quietly turning into a live stage. Windows opened, curtains twitched. A neighbor walked past with groceries, eyes darting toward the drama in my doorway. Observers, silent but present, cataloging the social tremors. The first layer of ripple had begun. By midday, I had arranged for the papers to be delivered to Thomas and Evelyn directly as well. No one could claim ignorance. By late afternoon, the HOA group chat lit up. Melanie's subtle updates filtered through, attempting to parse neutrality, but the details were inescapable. Vanessa's filing eviction notices, one message read. Thomas looks frantic, another. I didn't respond. I was beyond commentary. The chain of consequence was operating without interference. That evening, the HOA had scheduled a community safety discussion, thinly veiled as a meeting about neighborhood lights and traffic calming measures. It was perfect. The pavilion was neutral ground, public, visible, and I intended to use it to cement the social ramifications of the legal moves I had set in motion. Jennifer appeared uninvited, her white crossover gleaming under the floodlights. She carried her usual air of misplaced entitlement, assuming her position alongside Thomas in some imagined alliance against me. I stepped into the pavilion as if I belonged entirely, because I did. Thomas's face tightened as I approached, his usual smug posture faltering under the weight of anticipation and accumulated evidence. The HOA president, oblivious to the personal stakes, welcomed me politely, not knowing that the evening would shift from neighborhood discussion to carefully orchestrated revelation. Jennifer tried to intercept me with a small smile, a rehearsed charm. Vanessa, I just want to... I did not let her finish. You were seeing Thomas during work hours, I said, voice calm, clear, projecting over the low murmur of neighbors arranging chairs. Italian takeout receipts, mileage discrepancies, private calendar entries. All of it. My gaze swept the small crowd. And while you were planning to settle here, this kitchen was promised to you. The gasp from the neighbors was immediate, a collective inhalation of surprise, curiosity, and judgment. I let it linger. The tension was palpable. Jennifer's shoulders stiffened. We weren't, she began, then faltered, realizing the truth of the facts presented, undeniable and meticulously documented. Thomas stammered. It's not what it looks like. It's complicated. His attempt at spin collided with the cold arithmetic of legal ownership, leaving him exposed and fragile. I allowed a faint smile, controlled, precise. He was promising you my kitchen. So tell me, Jennifer, where were you planning on putting Claire's stroller? My pantry or my pantry? The pause afterward was theatrical only in its human effect. Faces turned, eyes widened, whispers began to ripple. The social degradation was precise and immediate. The neighbors, ever attuned to drama, were witnesses to the shift in power. Jennifer's jaw tightened, a physical manifestation of the crumbling confidence. Thomas's face flushed, the carefully curated calm evaporating. Evelyn and Claire remained, shocked and unable to interject effectively against the cascading clarity. Every word, every detail had been laid out exactly as intended. Documented evidence, social proof, legal foundation. As the meeting dispersed, I stepped back, letting the social and legal consequences settle. Thomas and Jennifer lingered, hesitant, trying to salvage some semblance of composure, but the momentum was mine. Every casual observer, every neighbor who had tuned into the pavilion as entertainment, now knew the reality. The house was mine, and their assumptions had been fundamentally flawed. Driving away, I allowed my mind to catalog the next moves. The eviction was only the first layer. Social humiliation had begun. Professional leverage would follow. The dominoes were lined up with precision, ready to fall in sequence. Thomas was frantic, but predictably so. He would call his mother again, plead for intervention, perhaps attempt negotiation. All actions would now be predictable and contained within the parameters I had set. Patience and observation would convert every misstep into leverage. By the time I reached the edge of the cul-de-sac, I allowed myself a short, wry thought. Call it 30,000 characters into the memoir of my patience, and we finally arrive at the chorus. Watch him lose everything he thought I wouldn't touch. I parked briefly, checked the folder again. Receipts, notices, calendar entries. Every piece of evidence had been accounted for, filed, duplicated for redundancy. The legal and social foundations were solid. Next, the professional consequences. Thomas had already exposed his overreach with off-book meetings, and the employer would be more than willing to intervene once informed. The neighborhood continued its rhythm around me. Sprinklers on automatic timers, evening walkers with dogs, the soft hum of distant televisions filtering through open windows. Ordinary, mundane, unsuspecting. Perfect conditions for methodical disruption. Every ordinary pattern, every small, predictable behavior would be leveraged in sequence. I allowed a moment to let the night settle. I did not rush. There is no rush in a plan executed correctly. Each move must be deliberate, precise, and timed for maximum impact. I reviewed the steps mentally: eviction, social exposure, professional leverage, physical assertion if necessary. All realistic, all grounded, all undeniable. The first domino had fallen. The pavilion had confirmed social reality. Eviction notices had confirmed legal reality. And I was fully prepared for the next layer: professional consequence. Thomas's carefully curated public and professional image would be disrupted without the need for dramatics, just by the logical application of fact and evidence. I drove home slowly, cataloging the faces, the reactions, the subtle shifts in posture and expression I had observed. Power in this environment is a quiet currency, measured in glances, murmurs, and the knowledge that everyone is watching and assessing. And I, having collected the evidence and sequenced the events, was the only one fully aware of the board's arrangement. Returning to the house, I prepared for the next morning. The documents needed review, the process server confirmations filed, and the subtle logistics of ensuring proper public observation confirmed. Every step taken, every precaution noted. Control is cumulative, and observation amplifies leverage. I poured myself a cup of tea, letting the steam rise slowly, appreciating the ordinary sensations: warmth, aroma, sound of liquid meeting ceramic. The neighborhood slumbered under artificial streetlight, unaware that the stage had shifted entirely. I did not smile for pleasure, not yet. I simply acknowledged that the sequence was functioning exactly as designed. Every observation, every miscalculation by Thomas and his cohorts, every social slip by Jennifer, Melanie, or Evelyn, all were tools, all were triggers for the next phase. The plan was moving inexorably forward, carefully, methodically. The first major confrontation had been precise, effective, undeniable. By the time I laid out the next day's sequence, notices filed, employer notifications ready, documentation prepped, the quiet satisfaction of methodical strategy filled the space. This was not vindication. It was execution, clean, precise, and inescapable. I allowed one final thought as I prepared for bed: factual, wry, self-aware. By tomorrow, all parties would be scrambling to adjust to reality, forced into acknowledgement by law, by social visibility, and by the inevitable consequences of misjudging me. And I would observe, always observant, always patient, always fully in control. Thomas had always liked to think of himself as untouchable, a man whose careful calculations extended beyond spreadsheets into every human interaction. By Tuesday morning, the first cracks had appeared. The eviction notices were delivered, social consequences had begun, and now it was time to introduce the professional leverage, the piece that would undermine him from the inside out without ever invoking law enforcement. I started the day reviewing his firm's non-solicitation agreement, cross-referencing it against the calendar entries he had left exposed in shared cloud files: dates, client names, meeting locations, all neatly documented, all proof of off-book interactions with Jennifer Hart. A spouse might notice, but a professional authority would take action. I composed an anonymous email, calm, factual, to his supervisor, including only the necessary information: dates, client names, and evidence of meetings outside approved channels. I didn't embellish. Facts suffice when they are meticulously curated. By mid-afternoon, the predictable result arrived. Thomas's boss had summoned him to an urgent review meeting. I imagined his internal panic, the careful veneer of control cracking under the weight of procedural scrutiny. No theatrics, no shouting, just the precise, predictable consequence of ignoring the boundaries set by law, employment contracts, and ethics. Meanwhile, I prepared for the second layer of confrontation. Thomas would undoubtedly attempt to follow, to negotiate, to assert a physical or verbal presence that would unsettle the timing. I drove deliberately through familiar streets, keeping to public roads, passing familiar landmarks, and noting the subtle positioning of streetlights, parking lot cameras, and casual bystanders. Every element of the chase had to be controlled, visible, and undeniable. Night fell with a quiet efficiency, bringing with it the familiar low hum of suburban life. Streetlights reflected off wet asphalt from an afternoon drizzle, creating shallow mirrors that captured the geometry of the neighborhood. That geometry was mine. I knew where cars would accelerate, where cul-de-sacs narrowed, where cameras could validate presence. Control was the difference between panic and composure, and I intended to wield it precisely. Thomas appeared behind me, headlights piercing the darkness, engine whining softly as he tried to close the distance. His movements were urgent, reckless, betraying the calm he so carefully cultivated in public. I did not accelerate or evade erratically. Instead, I maintained a deliberate pace, merging into neutral, well-lit spaces. The fire station parking lot presented itself as a perfect location, public, monitored, neutral, with minimal risk of intervention from uninvolved neighbors. He pulled alongside, window down, face flushed, hands gripping the steering wheel. "Vanessa," he began, voice attempting control but lacking it entirely. "We can talk. Just let's talk." I kept driving until I reached the designated space, signaling subtly, then parked. Engine off, lights low, doors unlocked. Neutral ground, entirely within my control. He followed, stepping out, attempting to impose his presence with the weight of desperation. "You, your mom, and Claire," I said, voice even, eyes locked on his, "out of my house by Friday. Claire's stroller, Evelyn's casserole pans, your gray suits, all of it. If anything of mine is missing when I walk through, I will document and pursue legal action. I'm very good at paperwork." His face contorted with frustration. "You're heartless," he barked, a miscalculation of tone given our setting. "Heartless?" I repeated, calm, leaning slightly on the doorframe. "You told me to move out for your sister. You said I could sleep somewhere else. Heartless is following your instructions. I'm merely precise." He tried the guilt angle, another tactic I had anticipated. "You're destroying me. You're ruining everything we built." I shook my head slightly, each motion measured. "You ruined you. I didn't create your decisions, your timing, or your arrogance. You set the pieces in motion." Nostalgia surfaced in his voice, the soft appeal of memory as leverage. "We had good years. Don't forget that. Don't throw it all away." "Yes, we had good years," I acknowledged, not fondly, not bitterly, merely factually. "You should have stayed in them." He tried threats, half rehearsed, half panicked. "I can make this ugly in court. You won't get away with it." I raised my eyebrows, calm, precise. "You have no standing on the title, and you know it now. That's not negotiation. That's observation. Facts. Your attempt to coerce me fails before it begins." He lunged slightly, reckless, grabbing at my wrist with a force intended to intimidate. I stepped back, freed myself, and with a controlled motion, guided him away from the car, ensuring he could not corner or escalate in private. The wet pavement glinted faintly under the parking lot lights as we stood, two figures framed by geometry, tension, and observation. "You didn't just lie," I said, voice rising slightly, cutting through the night air. "You brought your sister in and told me to leave. You let her smirk in my face. You told a woman from the bank that my house was going to be hers. You thought I would be quiet enough to step aside and watch you stage my life with new actors. You thought I would help you carry in her boxes." His face slackened, surprise and realization flickering across features that had once been so carefully curated. He attempted to interject, to argue, to justify, but I continued, measured, relentless. "You are out. Claire is out. Evelyn is out. The house is going on the market at 4. You're suspended from your firm, and nobody in this zip code will trust you with their accounts now that they know you share details at brunch with your girlfriend. Jennifer is not moving into my life. There is nothing left to negotiate." He tried one last plea, soft, tentative. "Vanessa, please, we can work this out." I let a thin, controlled smile touch my lips. "We already did. This is the result." For a moment, he stood, silent, absorbing the implications. Every argument he might have used, every assumed leverage evaporated under the clarity of observation, legal authority, and strategic patience. The dominoes were falling precisely as intended, and he could do nothing to alter the sequence. I walked back to the car slowly, deliberately, leaving him standing in the middle of the lot, the hum of streetlights above, the faint echo of distant traffic. Each step a measured assertion of control. He followed with his eyes, not his body. Presence alone was insufficient now. Sliding into the driver's seat, I started the engine. Calm, collected, deliberate. The folder of documents rested in the passenger seat, an unspoken reminder of the next sequence of consequences. Every detail, every observation, every human misstep had been catalogued, filed, and queued for strategic execution. As I drove back through the subdivision, headlights cutting through shadows, I noted the subtle shifts in the neighborhood's rhythm. Lawn sprinklers still automated, porch lights glowing softly, evening walkers passing with casual indifference. The world moved, unaware, ordinary, but perfectly suited to my unfolding sequence. Observation and timing were as powerful as any confrontation, perhaps more so. I arrived home, pulled out the documents again, and reviewed the sequence. Eviction notices delivered, social consequences in motion, professional leverage applied. The neighborhood chatter, carefully monitored, confirmed the ripples. Every action, every word, every look had been calculated for maximum effect without exceeding the bounds of reality or legality. Sitting at the kitchen counter, I allowed a faint, dry smile. By the end of the week, the house would be cleared, professionally documented, and listed. Thomas would be suspended, socially exposed, professionally compromised. Jennifer would understand her position fully and publicly. Claire and Evelyn would be contained within the legal reality they had ignored, forced to comply with consequences they had thought trivial. The first layer of confrontation, subtle but effective, had set the stage. Professional leverage ensured that no retreat was possible, no pretense sustainable. Social consequences ensured that reputation, always a currency in the neighborhood, would reflect the truth, indisputable and undeniable. By the time night settled fully, I had cataloged the entire day, anticipating the next sequence of moves: moving day, hallway assertion, final private confrontation, every detail of observation, timing, and leverage noted, every potential variable accounted for. The night outside was quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. Inside, the calculation continued. The first wave had landed with precision, the second was already in motion. Patience, observation, and methodical action would carry through. There was no need for dramatics beyond what had already unfolded. Control, quiet, and precise sufficed. Tomorrow, the escalation would continue. Every piece of leverage, legal and social, would align with timing, observation, and consequence. Each party would understand fully and irreversibly that the house, the schedule, the environment, and the social reality were under my control. I set the folder on the countertop, neat, organized, evidence stacked, and ready. Tea in hand, I allowed a brief nod to satisfaction. Not joy, not triumph, merely acknowledgement of the sequence unfolding exactly as intended. Control asserted, observation complete, consequences cued. Tomorrow, the dominoes would continue to fall. Morning arrived in the cul-de-sac like a curated photograph, sunlight soft across manicured lawns, sprinklers misting tiny rainbows over trimmed hedges, the faint scent of coffee drifting from kitchens that were already awake. I pulled into my driveway, the car engine low and deliberate, and let the neighborhood absorb the ordinary rhythm of a day that would, for them, become unforgettable. I had arranged for a neutral property inspector to accompany me. His presence would ensure that every step, every observation, every document was grounded in procedural legitimacy. I carried my folder, meticulously organized with receipts, notices, and timelines of all previous interactions. Professionalism was my armor. Observation was my weapon. The house was quiet. Too quiet, considering the storm about to arrive. Claire, predictably dramatic, had begun packing the night before, but had left half of her belongings in deliberate disarray, a protest in physical form. I found her sitting cross-legged on the guest room floor, surrounded by bags, boxes, and a stroller she insisted must stay assembled. She looked up, expecting outrage, panic, or pleading. I offered none. "You uprooted yourself when you told me to get out in my own kitchen," I said, voice calm, precise, factual. No inflection, no judgment, only observation. She blinked, then pursed her lips. The wail I had anticipated in my mental map of events was delayed, but the tension was already palpable. Evelyn hovered near the staircase, every motion calculated to convey indignation. She clutched her teacup as if it were a shield, though the contents were cold. "Vanessa, this is harsh," she said, words dripping with passive-aggressive suggestion. I leaned against the counter, arms folded, unshaken. "No," I said simply. "I'm thorough." By mid-morning, the predictable element appeared. Jennifer Hart, assuming she could assert presence, attempted entry with her characteristic confidence. She walked through the front door as if the house belonged to her, eyes sweeping the space, lips curving into a polite smile that didn't reach her gaze. I stepped into her path, deliberately placing myself between her and the primary bedroom. My hand rested lightly on the doorframe, asserting presence, control, authority. "No," I said, quietly but unmistakably. She tried to push past, a small shove, testing boundaries. I placed my forearm against hers and guided her back. The wall met her shoulder with a firm, non-injurious press. I leaned in, maintaining eye contact. "Repeat after me. This is not your house. You are not moving in. You are not standing in my doorway and telling me where I sleep." Her jaw tightened, and she folded, eyes flicking to the floor. The subtle humiliation was effective. The first layer of physical assertion had been completed without drama. She understood, finally, that entitlement and assumption do not equate to reality. As Jennifer recoiled, Claire's sobs began in earnest, a dramatic accompaniment to the quiet but decisive assertion of control unfolding in the hallway. Evelyn huffed from her perch near the staircase, muttering indignantly. The neighborhood, if anyone had been watching, would have understood. The power balance had shifted. Observation, timing, and methodical presence had dismantled assumptions faster than words could. Melanie appeared under the guise of helping Claire pack. Her arrival was predictable, yet strategically valuable. I pulled her aside, away from the others, and she leaned in, voice low, tinged with guilt. Thomas made it sound like you were cruel and that he was trapped. I went along with it. I shouldn't have. You should know. He told Jennifer this place would be theirs by mid-month. Her confession confirmed the timeline and the depth of deception I had suspected. I nodded, acknowledging the information, but offered no forgiveness, no sentimental remark. Information is currency. Friendship is irrelevant when negotiating reality. Boxes were being loaded into borrowed SUVs, Claire directing each movement with loud protest, Evelyn commenting on the indignity of it all, and Thomas moving frantically between vehicles. Sweat glistened on his forehead, his face blotchy with a combination of exertion and panic. I catalogued every motion with detached precision, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the missteps, the signs of desperation. The inspector moved with me through the house, documenting condition, photographing counters, closets, and the guest room. Every detail was verified, every signature noted. The house, pristine and under control, reflected not just ownership, but the authority that comes from preparation, observation, and precision. I watched as Jennifer attempted to assert dominance again, stepping toward the main bedroom. Action scene number 5 unfolded with deliberate control. I positioned myself between her and the door, pressed firmly against her, voice low and unwavering. "No!" She pushed. I pressed back, guided her away. "Repeat after me. This is not your house. You are not moving in. You are not telling me where to sleep." Her shoulders sagged. The subtle, calculated humiliation completed, I let her retreat, eyes lowered, chest tight. Every miscalculation she had made, every assumption of entitlement had been corrected without harm, without drama, with precise enforcement of boundaries. Thomas, meanwhile, was managing boxes like a man walking a tightrope of panic. Each item loaded into the SUV was a visual representation of loss, his careful life rearranged by my methodical orchestration. The neighbors, still discreetly observing from porches and windows, would bear witness to the dismantling of his assumptions, every movement catalogued in their mental records for the inevitable social fallout. Evelyn muttered complaints about propriety, and Claire wept audibly on the porch. I observed, neutral, noting that the people who had mocked my quiet nature, who had assumed I would fold, were now exhibiting the chaos I had anticipated. The social equilibrium had shifted entirely. Observation, timing, and procedural adherence had ensured control. I stepped outside, clipboard in hand, confirming the details with the inspector. Photographs were taken, timestamps recorded, evidence of condition noted. The legal and procedural layer of control was complete. Ownership, authority, and observation combined to reinforce the inevitable outcomes. Melanie's last-minute admission added clarity to the timeline. I made a mental note to adjust leverage accordingly, but no additional communication was necessary. Confirmation of Thomas's intentions, Jennifer's assumptions, and the timing of their plans sufficed. Control remained complete, precise, and methodical. By late afternoon, I had contacted a realtor colleague. The house would be listed, documents prepared, photographs scheduled. A portion of expected proceeds would be donated to a shelter for single mothers. A calculated move to amplify contrast with Claire's entitlement while ensuring procedural and social propriety. No moral lecture required. The gesture was factual, observable, and irreversible once executed. I walked through the house, each room reflecting the orchestrated dismantling of assumption and entitlement. The countertops gleamed, closets empty, floors swept, walls unmarred. Every observation, every detail had been accounted for. The human variables had aligned according to plan. Jennifer's presence had been corrected, Claire's dramatics contained, Evelyn's indignation catalogued. Thomas remained flustered, sweaty, uncoordinated. The theater of suburban authority played out exactly as predicted. By evening, the trucks had arrived to collect the remaining boxes. Neighbors observed from windows, porches, and passing cars. The ordinary rhythm of the neighborhood, sunlight fading into evening, contrasted sharply with the controlled chaos unfolding in my driveway. Every movement had been managed, every confrontation executed without excess drama, and every participant forced to acknowledge the reality of ownership, authority, and consequence. I paused in the entryway, observing the final moments of packing and relocation. Jennifer had left, visibly shaken, her assumptions corrected without spectacle. Claire had been guided through the procedure, sobs and indignation present but contained. Evelyn had retreated, muttering, but powerless to reverse the legal and procedural certainty of the day. Thomas moved between vehicles, attempting control, asserting influence, failing at every turn. I allowed myself one brief, dry smile, acknowledging the precision of the day's orchestration. Observation, preparation, and methodical enforcement had ensured that the first wave of control, both social and procedural, had been applied effectively. Every detail documented, every consequence realized, every assumption corrected. As the sun dipped fully below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac, I stood in the now empty living room, surveying the space. Each room reflected control, authority, and preparation. The first layer of social, legal, and personal consequences had been fully executed. Observation, timing, and methodical planning had delivered the anticipated outcomes. I allowed a brief internal check. 45,000 characters into this suburban sermon, and the expectation of narrative softening, the moment for reflection, was irrelevant. Control remained absolute, observation complete, and the next phase, the final private confrontation, ready to be executed on my schedule. Tomorrow, the house would be listed, the professional consequences in motion, and the final personal assertion of authority would unfold in an empty, prepared, staged space. Every variable accounted for, every participant aware of their position, every outcome predetermined through careful observation and methodical action. I left the kitchen, shutting the door behind me. Each lock engaged, every detail verified, and the house, mine entirely, reflected the controlled precision of every step taken, every miscalculation corrected, and every assumption challenged. The first major confrontation was complete. The second wave, professional, procedural, and personal, was set, and the final, decisive assertion of authority awaited only the right moment. The cul-de-sac settled into ordinary quiet, unsuspecting, mundane, and I, fully prepared, fully in control, allowed the calm to underscore the certainty of the coming sequence. Observation, calculation, and deliberate action had delivered exactly the outcomes anticipated, and tomorrow all remaining assumptions would be corrected with equal precision. The house was hollow. Every room echoed in ways that made ordinary sounds feel amplified. The pale gray walls reflected the late afternoon light, cold and neutral, stripped of furniture, of comfort, of any illusion that this was the domestic stage Thomas had imagined. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and cleaning solution, ordinary suburban scents, yet under them hung tension, sharp and tangible. I waited in the kitchen, leaning lightly against the island, arms crossed, eyes sweeping the empty space. Every drawer, every countertop, every corner had been documented, inspected, and verified. Every detail recorded for evidence, observation, and leverage. The house, devoid of distractions, became a courtroom, a stage, and a battlefield simultaneously. I did not pace, I did not fidget. Control was in stillness, in observation, in the precise measurement of the moment. He arrived as expected, alone, eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and calculated charm. He wore the expression of a man who thinks a smile, a plea, or a touch of nostalgia can rewrite documented fact. He had rehearsed 3 tactics, all designed to unsettle me: guilt, nostalgia, and threat. I had cataloged them in advance, anticipating tone, inflection, and posture. "You're ruining me," he began, voice trembling despite the effort to appear composed. "Vanessa, you don't have to do this. We can fix it." I let him speak, silent, arms crossed, eyes on his every movement. "You ruined you," I said finally, voice calm, precise. "I did not create your actions, your assumptions, or your failures. Observation and fact are impartial. You were the architect of this collapse." He tried nostalgia next, the soft appeal to memory, to shared years, the kind of argument built on emotion rather than reality. "We had good years. Remember that. Don't throw it all away." "Yes, we had good years," I allowed, nodding slightly. "And you should have remained in them." My tone carried neither bitterness nor affection, only factual assessment. Control resides in clarity, not sentiment. His final tactic, the threat, was more immediate. "I can make this ugly in court. You have no idea." I cut him off, eyebrows raised, voice calm, measured. "You have no standing on the title. You know this. Threats are ineffective against documented reality." He shifted, hands fidgeting, the weight of his miscalculations pressing visibly on his posture. I allowed a fraction of a second for him to absorb the implications. He attempted to lunge, to grasp at my wrist with a motion meant to intimidate. I stepped back with controlled precision, freed myself, and guided him away from the kitchen island just enough to prevent escalation but to demonstrate full command of the space. "You didn't just lie," I said, voice rising slightly for emphasis, resonant in the empty room. "You brought your sister in and told me to leave. You let her smirk in my face. You promised my kitchen to another woman. You thought I would be quiet enough to let you stage my life with new actors, to carry boxes that were never yours to dictate. His face slackened. Surprise, frustration, and recognition flickered across the features he had spent years carefully curating. He tried to speak over me. I allowed no interruption. The sequence was mine, precisely executed. You are out. Claire is out. Evelyn is out. The house is going on the market at 4. You are suspended from your firm, and nobody in this zip code will trust you with their accounts now that it's public knowledge you shared sensitive client details with a third party. Jennifer is not moving into my life. There is nothing left to negotiate. He tried a final plea, tentative and desperate. Vanessa, please. We can work this out. There has to be some... I let a thin, controlled smile touch my lips. We already did. This is the result. The room held a moment of suspended tension. His assumptions, rehearsals, and imagined leverage had been dismantled by evidence, procedure, and precise, relentless control. I had catalogued, anticipated, and executed each step. The dominoes had fallen exactly as intended. I stepped toward the front door, slow and deliberate, a gesture of authority rather than threat. Time to clear the stage, Tom, I said. My voice carried a quiet finality, calm but undeniably commanding. He understood. Every possibility of negotiation had been removed. Every presumption he had built his actions upon had been corrected. He stood, silent, processing the certainty of the moment. The house, stripped of furniture and artifice, mirrored the absolute control I had asserted over both environment and circumstance. He had nowhere to retreat. The social, legal, and procedural ramifications were complete. Observation, preparation, and execution had aligned perfectly. I watched him step over the threshold. The instant he left, I engaged the lock, the final subtle assertion of control. No argument, no further communication, no chance for retreat. The house, my property, my authority, was absolute. I leaned my forehead against the painted wood, cool, smooth under my skin, breath even, controlled, observation complete. No triumph, no celebration, only acknowledgement of exactitude. Every detail, every observation, every step of planning had coalesced into this precise, unassailable moment. Outside, the cul-de-sac returned to ordinary quiet. The sun dipped below the horizon, ordinary streetlights flickering on, neighbors tending to evening routines, unaware that the stage had been reset completely. Inside, the house reflected control, precision, and methodical assertion. Every step of revenge, professional leverage, social correction, and personal assertion had been executed without error. I stepped back into the open space of the empty living room, eyes sweeping the familiar contours, noting every shadow, every reflection. The house was mine, fully, in every sense of ownership, authority, and consequence. Every miscalculation, every assumption by Thomas, Claire, Evelyn, and Jennifer had been addressed. Observation, planning, and execution had converged to create a singular, definitive outcome. No future scene awaited. No reflection on reconciliation or healing. No soft landing, no pause. The house, the sequence, and the consequences were complete. Control had been asserted, authority confirmed, and the final domino had fallen. I allowed one last quiet breath, steady and controlled. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and late afternoon light. I stepped back, survey complete, presence undeniable. The sequence was finished, and the moment frozen in precise culmination. The door remained locked, the house empty, and the victory, absolute, unambiguous, and methodical, secured. Observation, strategy, and execution had aligned perfectly, and the narrative concluded at its peak. No epilogue, no final word beyond the immediate certainty of control. The stage was cleared, the scene frozen. I, fully composed, fully in command, observed the result. And that was all.